Welcome back, Star Wars fanatics. This video is going to be a little bit different. I want to thank the good people at Rebel Force Radio for granting me permission for doing this. If you haven't seen their channel, I've linked it and the following interview in the description below. Today I'll be breaking down their interview with Dave Filoni as it pertains to Jango Fett and his status as a Mandalorian. I know a lot has changed since this interview, but it still holds true in the new Star Wars canon. Basically, I'm going to interpret what Dave Filoni said about Jango Fett and how so many fans have pulled bits and pieces from it to fit their own narrative. I'll play the entire interview first, then break down what's actually being said. Before I continue, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button to see more great Star Wars content as I release it. Now, without further ado, here's the Dave Filoni interview about Jango Fett.
Jango Fett was a common bounty hunter. How he acquired that armor is beyond me.
In discussions directly with George, he was very adamant about Jango not being Mandalorian, which is the entire reason why that scene existed, that moment. To have the specificity that Jango was not Mandalorian, at least not to Olmec, not to those Mandalorians. So, I think the assumption being when Attack of the Clones came out, of course, Jango must be a Mandalorian because there he has the armor. But, he's a bounty hunter. Bounty hunters, as we showed in the series, wear all kinds of armor. Of course, Boba Fett famously wearing Mandalorian armor. So you have that tradition of his father's son wearing this armor, but it doesn't speak to, the bigger warrior cast. Now, Jango was a bounty hunter that somehow came into having that armor. Perhaps he ran for a period with Mandalorians, was adopted into that warrior culture for a period and trained with them and gained greater skills at that point. I think all that's possible, but would he have a direct blood relation to that line like Satine would? No. He wouldn't be a warrior of that nature. He's different. And he's, not working the most honorable profession anyway, as a warrior, being a bounty hunter. So, I hope that clears it up. Probably you'll just get more mail now from this answer, and probably I'll get more questions at Comic-Con. But as far as, for me, the continuity that I'm expressing in the Clone Wars, Olmec is not willing to commit to Obi-Wan the idea that Jango Fett's a Mandalorian. And I believe Jango was adopted into the Mandalorian culture in the comic books. He wasn't, per se, of blood. And in the comics and a lot of other material, the idea that you are of blood and Mandalorian isn't necessarily, I saw them go as far as having different aliens like Rhodians being Mandalorians. So there's a slightly different concept there for what Olmec would probably think of as a Mandalorian. And it's kind of easy to assume, well, why would Olmec know how this guy Jango Fett got his armor if we're to perceive that, they were working much more subversively or as a splinter group? We have not got into the case about the Mandalore, the title that's, the rightful ruler. I kind of try to portray Pre Vizsla as the guy that thinks that he should be that he should take over, that he should rule, that he needs to reinstitute these warrior ways of the past, that Satine is destroying all of that, and it's wrong. It's not who they are. That's kind of what's at stake for him. But, that's kind of why Jango's not, a Mandalorian per se, especially to someone like Olmec.
So there it is, from the mouth of the creative genius behind the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and other upcoming Star Wars projects. Again, a huge thank you to Rebel Force Radio for allowing me to use this interview. Now let's break it down. If you only listen to the first few seconds of the interview, you can take away that George Lucas didn't want Jango Fett to be a Mandalorian. If you listen on, he clarifies that Jango Fett wasn't a Mandalorian to Olmec and those type of Mandalorians. He then goes on to say that Jango was a bounty hunter, and bounty hunters wore all kinds of armor, and we see that. But perhaps he ran with Mandalorians for a period and was adopted into the Mandalorian warrior culture. But he then clarifies again, he didn't have a direct blood relation to Mandalorians. Once again, if we stop the interview there without listening further, Jango Fett isn't a Mandalorian. But Dave Filoni doesn't stop there. he goes on to say that he believes Jango is adopted into the Mandalorian culture in the comic books, which is true in the old expanded universe. But Dave Filoni also brings that material into the canon by saying that it doesn't fit into the concept of being a Mandalorian by people like Prime Minister Olmec, who was born into it. For the rest of the interview, he admits that Jango isn't a Mandalorian in the eyes of someone like Olmec. And how would Olmec know how Jango Fett obtained his armor? Dave Filoni doesn't say this, but in my own interpretation, the galaxy is a big place. There are Mandalorian splinter groups everywhere, and we've seen this in the Mandalorian series. So how would Olmec know of everyone adopted into the Mandalorian culture? He wouldn't. Dave Filoni tends to be slightly ambiguous on his own feelings and thoughts as to Jango Fett's right to wear the armor, if you listen passively. But if you listen closely, he is stating that Jango Fett was adopted in, and some purebloods don't consider foundlings Mandalorian. If you're a Harry Potter fan, a lot of these concepts are mentioned in that series as well. Take Hermione, for example. She was born of parents that were non-magic folk, yet she is a strong wizard. Does her birthright supersede what Hermione is? Not at all. But there are those in the Harry Potter world that denounce her and call her names like Mudblood. The same is true for Jango Fett. He wasn't born into the culture, but he was adopted into it. In The Mandalorian Season 2, this is all cleared up with the chain code in Boba Fett's armor. So yes, I know this interview is a bit outdated. However, there are still those who say Jango Fett isn't a Mandalorian because Olmec said so, or the first 30 seconds of the Dave Filoni interview points to him being a non-Mandalorian. But now we have the truth. Jango Fett is a Mandalorian and deserves the armor, as Boba Fett deserves the armor. Let's not forget, we also see Din Djarin threaten to kill Cobb Vanth for wearing Mandalorian armor without the right to do so. Yet, he concedes that Boba Fett's right is to wear the armor. I know I've made a lot of videos on this topic, but I just wanted to take Dave Filoni's own words to clarify my point and why I believe both Fetts to be Mandalorian. Let's face it, if not for Boba Fett and Jango Fett, we would have no Mandalorians at all. The purpose of this wasn't really to fit my own narrative, but rather to clarify and break down what Dave Filoni was saying. This interview is 2.5 years old. That puts it just before The Mandalorian Season 1 released. So, I'm sure he didn't want to spoil too much as they were preparing for Season 2 at that time, presumably. The Book of Boba Fett set to release in exactly 2 weeks from now. I don't know everything in store for us, and we may not get clarity in the first season as to whether Boba Fett will eventually consider himself a Mandalorian, assuming there will be more than one season, of course. Okay, I'm hoping there will be more than one season. There's so much to clarify with his character, and I don't think 7 episodes will do it, unless each episode is movie length. This interview is one I've watched repeatedly to try to get answers. Dave Filoni is like George Lucas, but better. At least Dave Filoni knows how to write dialogue, or bring in someone that can. That isn't a slam on George Lucas at all. I'm grateful for everything he's done, but it's more understanding a man's limits and their creativity. We all have them. A lot of fans cry out that George Lucas needs to come back, return, take over Star Wars again. I'm sorry, but I'd like George Lucas to enjoy retirement. He can't carry the torch forever. I think we're in good hands with Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, Robert Rodriguez, Bryce Dallas Howard, Rick Famuyiwa, and Taika Waititi. If you think the sequel trilogy is bad and that's the new Lucasfilm and that's all we're going to get, watch The Mandalorian, The Clone Wars Season 7, Star Wars Rebels, and any number of upcoming Star Wars projects. It's in good hands, and I like where it's going now. But what do you think? Are you still up in the air about the Jango Fett topic? Personally, I think Dave Filoni was being purposely ambiguous so not to give away too much in upcoming projects at that time. But he does reiterate that it's in the eyes of Olmec that Jango Fett wasn't a Mandalorian. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. My next video is going to piggyback off this video, so make sure you're subscribed to get that video when I release it in a couple days. Also, hit the thumbs up or the thumbs down if you feel I haven't done my job. And I want to thank Rebel Force Radio one more time for the use of this interview. If you haven't checked them out, they're a positive Star Wars YouTube channel like myself. I've linked them and this interview in the description below. Thank you for watching, and remember, this is the way, the only way.